Hey, Prime members! Have you heard? You can listen to your favorite podcasts ad-free? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free-podcast. That's amazon.com/ad-free-podcast to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hi, everybody. Sharyl Attkisson here. Welcome to another edition of Full Measure After Hours. Today, a fascinating look at the epic global battle between populists and the establishment. Around the globe, and it might be said right here in the U.S., there is an epic battle underway between establishment political parties and those trying to wrest control away from them and return it to the people. One name for that is populism. But when analysts and establishment figures use the word populism, they usually mean it in a derogatory fashion. It's interesting to hear those who are against populism say that the populists are anti-democratic and prey on fear. But at that very moment, those who are criticizing populism are, it could be argued, being anti-democratic and preying upon fear. In today's podcast, you will hear from two members of the British Parliament on this topic, one conservative and one liberal. First, Neil Coyle of the Labour Party, which is considered more liberal, and then Mark Francois from the Conservative Party. First, Neil Coyle.
I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Bermondsey and Old Southwark, which is central London.
For an American audience, what is the Labour Party?
The Labour Party is the centre-left mainstream political party in the UK, and we've just won a fantastic general election here with a whopping majority.
Can you sort of set the stage, because it's a little bit confused. European politics, if anyone's watching them at all, there was this giant election. I happened to be in Greece, and I was hearing on the news that conservatives picked up seats everywhere. And then there was a second round, and all of a sudden I heard, well, nothing, that didn't happen after all. Can you explain in simple terms?
Yeah, we had some sloppy polls, I think. We need to look at why some of that went wrong. Not we as in the Labour Party, we as in the UK. But the Labour Party had a fantastic election result. In 2019, the Conservatives had an 80-seat majority, and they have now fallen to their worst defeat in modern times, in more than 100 years. The Labour Party has almost 2/3 of all the MPs in the House of Commons. The Labour Party doesn't have a long history in office. This is an incredible result from a really low bar back in 2019. Keir Starmer, our leader, has transformed the Labour Party, and I hope will now get round the tougher job of improving the country.
What do you think were the big driving issues?
So people felt that things were getting worse under the Conservatives and that they were paying more whilst their services dropped. That cost of living hit, as well as seeing increased waiting lists for the NHS, for healthcare, was a real factor. And I had people, even those who were considering not voting, we do a lot of door knocking, my local team is a big campaign team. If people said, oh, things don't change, I would challenge them and say, have they got worse? And uniformly, people would say, yes, things have got worse. They recognised that the Conservatives were not improving services, were charging them more, that corruption was high, that we were seeing the misuse of office, and people were angry, and they took that out in... There was also a massive amount of tactical voting here, so we saw very significant seat-by-seat swings, so there wasn't a uniform national picture.
Do you sense, not just here in the United Kingdom, but in Europe, there is fatigue with the politicians who have been running things? In other words, we've seen swings like this. They're not always right to left. Sometimes they're left to right, and this is happening in South America and throughout Europe in different places.
I think if you have a narrative about how you are trying to improve things, you'll get airtime, you'll get people to listen. If people have felt their taxes go up but their services diminish, or their country's economy get worse, then they will look for change, and that's understandable.
What are your views on populist trends? We've actually interviewed some people who are called populists who don't consider themselves populists, and they think they're the ones that are truly listening to the people. And then you talk to people who are not populists who say the populists are the danger. Like, have you engaged in that discussion at all or thought about it?
I get people sometimes. So a couple of weeks ago, I had a bloke, and almost invariably blokes, who came into one of my outreach sessions and said, the Labour Party weren't listening. We'd been in government 2 weeks, having won a significant majority, but he felt that we weren't listening already. And his anger was partly about immigration, amongst other issues. But he was also a climate change denier. He had a whole litany of problems. But I think some people in this country have got used to not being challenged about how we do politics. I think certainly under the last government there was a soft touch applied, even when we had people doing Nazi salutes and with Nazi swastika tattoos and things, or outside Parliament protesting. The last government would not condemn that as far right, and I found that deeply uncomfortable. We can't, if you're not prepared to challenge those who we fought and beat at huge cost to this country in the Second World War, then who will you challenge? And I think that's part of the problem with what some call populism. And also I find with those who claim to be populist, there's analysis of where problems are, but there aren't solutions. And that's difficult to handle as a politician. We need to engage people in arguments and fight over the solutions to what we accept as national problems. These people don't have solutions, they have division, and it can only end badly. And some of us have been saying, in particular since the Brexit referendum, the people who said all our problems were the fault of Europe, they haven't turned around and said they were wrong. They haven't turned around and said, actually, that's cost our economy and now there are problems. They've shifted their fight onto migration and non-white Brits. And this is a very dangerous path. The UK's in a tough spot in some ways. The Prime Minister is standing our ground and making clear that violence won't be tolerated. But there are some in this country who still don't accept you can be British and not white. And that is a fundamental problem with populists who they just don't understand what modern Britain looks like.
I want to talk more about immigration in a moment, but first, does the relative popularity of some populists teach anything to the establishment parties? Does it make you have to listen or take a turn or consider your own positions?
You have to consider your strategy. And the most successful populist in British politics in recent history was Boris Johnson, who tacked to the far right to draw out that 80-seat majority in 2019. But it was built on sand. He had no foundations. He couldn't deliver because there aren't solutions for these people. They are angry about immigration issues that cannot be resolved because they see immigration as anyone who's non-white. And I'm afraid modern Britain is multicultural, and that is where they have a problem. And you have to face up to that. You have to stand up to that. And Boris Johnson couldn't, and he failed to deliver on a whole heap of promises because populism is false promise. It can't deliver. And so the Labour Party explained what we could do, was realistic about what we could do, set out an agenda that was deliverable. Our manifesto was criticised for not being ambitious enough. That's purposeful because we don't want to go to the next election and have people say, well, you didn't deliver. We've put in already in traction policies that will deliver before the next election so that we can say to people, look, this is what we promised. This is what we've delivered. Trust us to continue.
When we've asked people about immigration and illegal immigration, here's what I'm getting, and you can tell me where this differs with your feelings. Most people are accepting and welcoming of the Ukrainian immigrants that have come here, or the refugees on refugee status. Even some on the left, however, think something needs to be done about uncontrolled or uninvited immigration. Is the United Kingdom at a point where it needs to take some action, or are the arms just open and there's an endless welcome mat?
We are taking action, and the command force is part of that. Scrapping the money wasted sending no one to Rwanda, £700 million. That instead of sending money to deliver nothing, some of that money is funding extra officers to work in partnership with other countries, including Turkey, not just frontline France and neighbours further upstream. But look, some of us also think that the UK has a significant international role to play, and some of avoiding people coming here is upstream. It's trying to prevent the problems that result in people fleeing their countries, be they conflict or be they environmental catastrophe that causes people to leave. We have to own and shoulder our responsibility in a way that the last government shirked, frankly. The response to the UK and the US chose to quit Afghanistan. I think that was a mistake, but that decision was made. And instead of supporting those who'd been our allies and trained and worked with us and protected our embassy staff, for example, a lot of those were abandoned. Some of those are coming over the English Channel by boat. They're taking very dangerous routes to get here, even though we owe them. And I find that unpalatable, and the government will change on that front, and it's right that we do.
Okay, we've been reporting for some years, gosh, for me, decades actually, on immigration when I worked for CBS News and CNN, and now I have this independent show here in the US and over here in Europe. In fact, in 2019, we were on boats in Greece when these poor people are being sent over on boats. We were with the Coast Guard. They're pulling them coming over from Turkey, pulling them out of the sea. For people who don't know, there's an immigration issue here as well. What would you say is the status, for someone who knows nothing about European immigration and illegal immigration, what would you say is the status? How would you give them what's been happening the past 10, 15 years?
I just think that there's international law that governs these issues, and when you see countries like Cairo, Egypt rather, which has a struggling economy, taking millions over the border from Sudan, when you have Bangladesh taking 1 million Rohingya Muslims, despite being a very poor economy, look at Jordan with more than half its population being Palestinian. There are countries that are not as wealthy, do not have the resources of the US or the UK, who are shouldering a disproportionate amount of the burden. And we need to look at ourselves and work out where we stand in global politics, where we stand. Do we want to allow other countries to go under because they can't maintain the demands that are put on them? Or do we want to be more supportive, and do we want to prevent conflict and environmental catastrophe? We have big roles to play because we have stronger economies and an international history and reputation to uphold, and we can be the bastions of democracy, and we can continue standing for our values, or we can walk away. And I would rather we didn't do that. Look at what's happened in Hong Kong, in Afghanistan. Democracy is disappearing because we are not standing up for our values sufficiently. That worries me, and I think the US and UK have bigger roles to play, not less.
Can you name a couple specific things? You indicated that there is upstream work to do in the countries themselves so that people don't want to flee. Do you have any specific proposals now that your party was going to have a lot of control that you would advocate happening here in Great Britain?
There are some that I make privately around to support Ukraine, for example, but some of that discussion needs to be had privately. There was some around Sudan where we need to be more interventionist, frankly. And we need to be looking at countries like Sierra Leone, where an election was genuinely stolen, not the nonsense we see in the United States. We see a man holding on to the presidential office who doesn't deserve to be there and needs to have a runoff with his main opponent. If we do not make clear that we will intervene, be it sanctions, different levels of intervention, these difficulties will result in broader conflict, or potentially for people feeling the need to leave countries and arrive here. And if that's what people are saying they don't want, then we need to work out how to help upstream. And the last government cut our army and cut our aid budget. Well, that doesn't help either.
Have you been hearing from constituents in the past 5 to 10 years that they want more control over the immigration situation?
But my constituency varies, and there are some who say they want to see controls and they want to see the point system that Labour is retaining and strengthening. There are others who recognise that, look at Labour's house building agenda. We want to build 1.5 million homes. The workforce to do that is not here. Now, we can train some Brits, we can deliver a bigger UK domestic workforce, but I think we have to be honest about where the workforce comes from. Same as health and social care. If we want to fix the problems of the NHS, we're sat opposite St Thomas's Hospital. If we want that hospital to continue to be global class, then we need to make sure it's got the workforce to deliver the service it needs. That includes some international workers. And I think that most people want our economy to do well, and they want the services to improve, and they want the shops to be full of goods, and they want their pockets as full as possible. To do that, we need to be more robust about defending the benefits of immigration. Universities are another good example. They're businesses in the UK, and they do well. They are internationally renowned. And I have universities and university accommodation in my constituency. I want those universities to succeed. That means being robust in saying, well, we want those people to come here, spend money at university, and spend money having a great time at university, enjoying everything that London and the UK has to offer. I think we need to try and shift the debate. And unfortunately, the incidents across the country in the last few days allow some space to do that. The people who have shown their true colours, which is that they don't accept any level of immigration. Some of it's outright racism and Islamophobia that we're seeing in the UK right now in pockets, in different bits of the country. Thankfully, these people are a tiny minority, and they will be dealt with. They'll be in prison.
Do you see a difference between, my last question on immigration, do you see a difference between controlled and invited immigration for the purposes you described, and then the uninvited immigration?
So, controlled as the university places is the economy that we know where there are gaps. And in the UK, we have the Migration Advisory Committee that Labour will be strengthening. This is the body that tells the government, the Home Office in particular, which sectors of the British economy need more workers and need a more generous system of invitation and fast-tracking Home Office visas, for example. We just need to get on with that. I want services to improve. This election was about people saying services weren't good enough. So if we want them to improve, we need to be honest about how to fix that, and that includes what you term invited immigration. Uninvited could be family members of those who are invited. So it gets murky quite quickly when you use that kind of language. I think that the public difference, where the public have a problem, is illegal and unlawful entry into the UK. That's where the public have a bigger problem. There are different ways of fixing that, including, for example, coming back to Afghanistan, the biggest group of people crossing the English Channel in the boats unlawfully. They shouldn't be doing it. Nobody thinks they should be doing it. The way to fix that, in part, is to respect the fact that some of them fought for us and allow them to either join family here or come through our asylum process and arrive by flights and safely, rather than turning up in a boat.
Next up, Mark Francois from the British Conservative Party.
Worried about letting someone else pick out the perfect avocado for your perfect impress them on the third date guacamole? Well, good thing Instacart shoppers are as picky as you are. They find ripe avocados like it's their guac on the line. They are milk expiration date detectives. They bag eggs like the 12 precious pieces of cargo they are. So let Instacart shoppers overthink your groceries so that you can overthink what you'll wear on that third date. Download the Instacart app today to get free delivery on your first 3 orders, while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
All right, let's be real. If you're a content creator, blogger, or an entrepreneur just getting started, the last thing you want to do is spend hours building a website. That's where Bluehost comes in. Their AI tools make custom WordPress sites in minutes. No coding, no stressing. You also get built-in marketing and e-commerce tools to grow your business. And with faster loading, you can secure the bag without the lag. It's never been easier to launch your website. Go to Bluehost.com now to get started.
And I'm the Member of Parliament for Rayleigh and Wickford in Essex, out by the Essex coast.
For people who don't know what's been happening in politics in the last month or two here in the UK, or how long ago was that, can you give an overview level in very simple terms of what just happened?
Well, we had a general election which took place on the 4th of July, and my party, the Conservative Party, suffered a heavy defeat. And the Labour Party under Sir Keir Starmer won with a very large majority by British standards of 172 seats. So of the 650 seats in the House of Commons, they now have over 400, And so they've recently formed an incoming administration.
What would you say are the driving issues that caused your party to lose so many seats?
There are several. I think firstly, people felt that we hadn't delivered on our promises. We'd been in government for 14 years. We'd promised a number of things, some of which we certainly achieved. We promised that we'd get Brexit done and leave the European Union. We did. We legally left the EU. But there are some other areas, particularly in relation to immigration and stopping illegal migrants coming across the Channel. The Prime Minister promised that he would stop the boats, was the slogan, and we didn't stop them. And a lot of people were very angry about that, and they took it out on us in the general election.
How does this dynamic play into the issues of what we call populism? There are trends, I think, around the world where people are expressing discontent or fatigue with whoever's the party, the ruling politicians, and making changes. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I used to have a lot to do with the EU. I was a big critic of the European Union. And often the EU establishment would use the term populist as a term of derision. It meant they would use it to insult other politicians they didn't agree with, often because those politicians were recommending a course of action that the EU establishment didn't want to do. So in a European context, at least, the term populist is often used by people in the establishment to deride people who've got radical ideas with which they don't agree.
Do you agree with that characterization? What are your thoughts about populism and any trends?
Well, you would hope that politicians would do things which might be popular. So I don't think that it's right to deride people just because they say something that the common man or woman might well agree with, even if to some people in the metropolitan elite, those suggestions are politically incorrect. I think the using that term usually means that the people in the establishment haven't always got an answer to the problem.
Would you say your party is an establishment party?
Not always. Under Margaret Thatcher, famously, we won 3 general elections in a row by being radical. But perhaps over the last 14 years, we got too comfortable. We ducked a number of difficult decisions. We fell back, perhaps in some cases, on platitudes. And when it came to the general election, people gave their opinion on that. And if I'm honest, we didn't run the best general election campaign we've ever ran. We had a campaign with a number of big errors in it.
From what you describe, it sounds like you're hearing that constituents and voters were tired of giving a chance to who was in charge, which was your party, and not feeling like they were being listened to.
Someone once wrote that the most precious quality in politics is the benefit of the doubt. And by the time we got to this general election, people were no longer giving us the benefit of the doubt. That was very evident when you went door knocking on the doorsteps.
What kinds of things did people say to you?
They were frustrated, not just about not stopping the boats, but there were some economic measures that we promised, not all of which we'd managed to bring in. There were some things in the field of law and order that we hadn't quite carried through. So there was a sense of frustration on the doorsteps, and because of that, people weren't giving us the benefit of the doubt, and they were giving it to Labour. We have our budget on the 30th of October now, when the government set out their fiscal and tax plans for the year ahead. I suspect on that day the Labour government's honeymoon will end, because it looks like there are going to be some serious tax rises, which they tried to hide in the election. On the 30th of October, they'll probably all come out into the open. That won't be very popular either.
Considering what's been going on here in terms of illegal immigration in the past decade, you might be surprised if I tell you I think most Americans don't even know that there is an immigration issue in Europe when I talk to them. How would you explain in very simple terms what's been happening here to an American who hasn't kept up on it?
Well, it's not entirely dissimilar to your situation with the southern border. And the last time I was in Washington meeting with congressmen, lobbying them to support Ukraine, I should add, this issue of the southern border came up again and again. So it's a very big issue in American politics. In our case, it's illegal migrants getting on boats coming across the English Channel into Britain, and it's an equally evocative issue here. You've had a debate about whether or not to carry on building a wall. We've had a debate about what we should do about those people coming over in small boats. And the Conservative Party had a method of dealing with that. In the end, the electorate didn't seem completely convinced. We lost the general election, but now Labour don't seem to have much of an answer either. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But it's as big an issue in Britain as it is in America.
In 2016, or that time period, I think the last many Americans heard was that Germany and Europe was opening its arms to as many who wanted to come over. Please come, we'll take you, we love you. And not so much coverage was given to sort of a radical shift when I think there were culture clashes, there were some terrorist attacks in Germany, there have been some economic realities that have happened since then. What is the mood now? When we interviewed people, even some, both on left and right, including the left, I mean, say they now want to control or think that's a big issue about controlling the uninvited immigration.
Well, the world is changing. We now have these mass migration flows, partly for economic reasons. And so you're getting millions of people on the move. And in this country, we have a generous tradition of providing asylum to people who are genuinely in fear of their lives. But within that context, many people who you and I might call economic migrants have attempted to exploit that system to the point where a lot of the public sympathy for the old system has gone. So one of the debates that we're having in Europe is how do we update our rules and regulations, particularly something called the European Convention on Human Rights, which was written in the aftermath of the Second World War. How do we update those kind of rules and regulations in order to try and prevent these sorts of migration flows? In other words, we're trying to deal with a 21st century problem with legislation that was written in the mid-20th.
The people on the side of, even again, those on the left seem to have sentiment and support for instituting some kind of control for the illegal immigration. But in the same breath, people who support mass migration to date accuse those on the other side of all pretty much being Islamophobic or hateful or racist. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't agree with characterizing anyone that is opposed to mass migration as a racist. I think it's important that we debate these matters sensibly and democratically, because our populations have to feel that their politicians don't lack the courage to talk about this issue. If those politicians, because they're worried about being criticised in a progressive media, don't talk about those issues, then they're providing space to real genuine extremists, not populists, but extremists, who will exploit that vacuum in a way that ultimately leads to serious violence.
Populism and this epic battle that I'm talking about is the topic of my cover story on Sunday, October 27th. To find out how to watch Full Measure every Sunday on television, go to SharylAttkisson.com and click the Full Measure tab. I have a list of stations and times, or you can watch anytime at fullmeasure.news. We post the replay of the TV show every Sunday by about noon Eastern time, and you can watch replays there right now at fullmeasure.news. If you haven't done it already, please check out my new bestseller, Follow the Science, How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails. Some of the 5-star feedback that I'm getting says that people are picking up the book and reading it cover to cover. They're so enthralled, if not somewhat disgusted, by these anecdotes with documentation and citations explaining how our medical establishment has become so corrupted and how this is leading to compromised health, even as we've never spent more money on pills and potions and doctors and hospitals and insurance. And there's helpful information in there about how to take back control of your health. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and that if you did, you'll leave us a terrific review and share it with your friends. And check out my other podcast, the Sharyl Attkisson podcast. Do your own research, make up your own mind, think for yourself.